It's 4:31. Call to the order. Madeline, can you please do a roll call?
Alder Abbas,
Present.
Alder Martin,
Here.
Alder Carter, not here yet. Alder Bennett, not here yet. Alder Harrington McKinney, Alder Heck,
Here.
Alder Lemmer,
Here.
and Alder Wahalier.
Here.
Thank you. We will go to IT for announcement. Stefan?
All right, thank you. Okay, welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Panelists also have the ability to add pronouns after their name if they choose. Please do not alter the current naming convention. Simply add text after your name. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. The next is public comments. Madeline, is anybody registered for public comments?
We have two registrants registered currently for agenda item number 3 and agenda item number 4.
And they're both wishing to speak, correct?
Yes, when those items come up.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Next is disclosures and recusal. Any member of the body want to disclose or recuse? I do not see any hand raised, so we will move forward to the agenda item number 2, file number 66172, Task Force on Structure of City Government Ad Hoc Final Report Implementation Work Group Update. I will give the floor to the chair of the work group, Alder Furman.
Thank you, Council President. My update will be fairly brief. I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to know that we do have a, I would call it a end of term report that details the 25 meetings that the committee previously had up until the new council. One of the most important things, as a reminder for everybody and those that aren't familiar with this committee, is that this committee's job is to come up with actionable proposals based on the TFOG's recommendations. And so that's been our mission since we've started. We have a spreadsheet that's been attached to our agendas that tracks that. But our goal is to come up with proposals that the council can look at and decide, what they want to do with those proposals. We're not coming up with any new recommendations or anything like that. It's very much following along what the TFOG's final report is recommending and giving us as the council, or giving the full council, that is, the ability to either implement those changes or pass. One of the things we've done in the final report that does reflect also, the end of term final report that does reflect the spreadsheet is just sort of write out the different sections that we've broken the TFOG's recommendations into and give a status update on those. I'm not going to go through all of that today. I will say there are a few things that we do believe at this point should be discussed at upcoming CCEC meetings, and I'll talk about that very briefly. One of which is a 311 system. some of our recommendations, and specifically if people are following along with the spreadsheet at recommendations from TFOGs number 38, 39, and 41 deal with 311. CCEC received an update on the 311 program, which for those who have not heard that terminology, it's a non-emergency sort of a customer relations system that the city could use to help constituents better. We did receive a really, really good update at CCEC on March 30th. There were no next steps, and so at some point CCEC should talk about what are the next steps, where should that live, what's going to go on with that. So that's something that we believe as a committee CCEC should be looking at going forward. Another item that we do suggest that CCEC get an update on that was related to a bunch of different TFOGs recommendations is what's next for a legislative information system upgrade from the IT department. Recommendations 29, 35, 36, 37, 40, 42 all deal with that, and it's just making it easier for people to get information on Legistar and giving us feedback. So those are the items that we hope to see have further discussion at CCEC, and I'll work with the council president on making sure that all the information CCEC needs to take next steps on that and talk about that and come up with stuff for the council to review is there. But we're going to continue as a group to talk about the other recommendations and figure out, as I said, actionable proposals for the council to talk about. Our next meeting is on Thursday. Our focus is going to be on items that we believe to be related to the budget, so we can at least think about whether or not any of our actionable proposals should try to be in front of the council before the budget, 2022 budget, so that way it's for consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions about the end of term report or the TFOG's implementation work group work, but I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Alderman. Any member of the body have any question for Alderman? Rohek?
Thank you, President Abbas. Alder Furman, I think the report is awesome, and I like that. It's a to-do list essentially, and I noticed that some of those are. A couple of them involve discussions not just by CCEC, but by committees of the whole. And is that something that CCEC will need to follow through with, or is that something, I guess, that President Abbas and Vice President and the Vice President take care of, or how do those generally happen?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you. So that is something that I will have to work with council leadership on, seeing what the appropriate next steps are, and some of the examples of that are what to do about the referendum results. For example, I think that requires a full council discussion and not the task force, the implementation task force, to come up with recommendations. Obviously, the voters have spoken on the questions that were presented to them. What do we want to do next, if anything, based on the fact that TFOGs made particular recommendations. There's some of the stuff related to just meeting formats in general that I think as a committee as a whole we should be discussing, and some of those are tied into virtual meetings versus in person, and so I think we need to make some decisions there. So, for example, if we're going to continue with a lot of virtual meetings, what does it mean about providing childcare at meetings or parking at meetings, and some of it's meeting format stuff. So, for example, one recommendation is make council proclamations before legislative business begins at 6:30. So I think there are some examples there that would be appropriate for us as a council to decide what direction we want to go, and I'll certainly work with council leadership to get something scheduled. And I think some of those, very importantly, will help shorten meetings. So hopefully we can get that on the agenda and get something scheduled soon.
Thanks very much. Again, a tremendous amount of work went into this, and thanks for continuing to follow through.
Thanks, Alder Heck. Any other questions? I do not see any hand raised, so I will move to, and thank you, Alderman, for the update, and thank you, everyone on the task force, for the great work. Moving next, agenda item number 3, file number 66173, Men's Homeless Shelter Update. Jim and Dan, I believe, Jim O'Keefe, yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Alder Boss. So I have a very brief update that I hope will be a little bit illuminating on our search. I'd like to report the following. We have in the course of the last several weeks or a month or so evaluated at least 9 properties that we believe that we considered for permanent locations for a men's shelter. That list, upon further review and discussion, has been whittled down to 4 finalists. 2 of those 4 are what I would characterize as centrally located, and 2 of them are a bit more distant. 3 of the 4 are within the 3.5 mile radius that are laid out in the pending resolution of suggested criteria. One of them would involve substantial renovation of an existing structure, and 3 others would involve largely new construction. And the last thing that I would note is that 3 of the properties will require new appraisals, and that for us is a lengthy process, a time-consuming process that sort of sidelines us as we wait for the results. So we've got an appraisal that's scheduled to be completed on one of the properties the latter part of July, and we're probably looking into the middle part of August before appraisals will be available for 2 others. So Dan Rolfs from the City Real Estate Office has been really at the forefront of this search. And I don't know, Dan, if you've got additional details, or if alders have questions, perhaps Dan can help me respond to them.
I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or expand upon anything Jim discussed. At your discretion.
Alder McKinney.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could you expand on the 2 properties that Jim mentioned, and especially the ones that fits within the parameter of the distance, as that's one of the 2 that you're looking at, and just expand on where that is with those 2 and the condition of proximity to downtown?
Certainly. I will be a bit vague. That is not intended as a slight, but just for all involved, just to keep the specific locations, because we have not made any choices, or that we have not been directed to move anything forward. I'll be somewhat vague. One of them is very downtown. The next one is, I don't know if some might consider it downtown, but it's very close. And then sort of moving out from there, we have another one that is located, I think, within a mile and a half or so of the downtown. So as it relates to, I believe it's Legistar 65527, item 4 on your agenda, I believe those 3 would meet with that particular criteria identified in that resolution.
And Alder Harrington McKinney, if I might add that the one property that we're looking at closely that lies outside of that 3.5 mile radius does so by just a modest distance. So we're very close on all counts to that requested or suggested distance.
Thank you. I just want to mention we have one registrant, Mick Conard, in support but not want to speak for agenda item number 3. So I apologize for not mentioning that before. I have one quick question for you, Dan, or Jim, for you, is about the appraisal process and the timeline around appraisal. So I know one property you mentioned would come end of July and might be mid-August. I'm curious about other those central located properties. What is their appraisal timeline look like?
One of the properties, that process is complete. So I'm going to, just for the purposes of ease, if you will, I'd like to refer to them as 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 is the closest, 4 is the furthest out. Is that simply for the purposes of tonight? Is that acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay, no one's insulting me, so I'll take that as a yes. So 1, we do not need an appraisal for. That process is completed and squared away. Properties 2 and 4, we estimate that those appraisals would be completed by mid to late August. Property 3, we would have, we believe an appraisal will be complete. My hope is by the second to last week of July. And we do those appraisals for folks, for anyone who may be new to the council. Whenever we acquire or sell property, we always complete an appraisal with an outside appraiser so that we understand that the actual value of the property, and there's never a real or implied concern about the acquisition price or sale price of a property as we're using taxpayer dollars.
So Dan, if correct me if I'm wrong. So my understanding is property 1, 2, 3, 4, many of them or all of them could come in front of the Common Council in end of August or in September.
Depending upon the direction that we receive from the council members and from the mayor, they could be brought forward as here are several options to consider. The one thing that I would, two things that I would caution, one of which is obvious. As soon as this is brought forward, there will be a lot of feedback, I'm sure you know. Once we start putting addresses and pins on the map, there will be a lot of feedback. The other item is the process that we are working with is a willing seller, willing buyer process. So just because we have an appraisal and it says it's worth X, the seller does not have to sell to us for a price that we can support. We may believe it's worth, $100 and they may want $300. I'm just for the purposes of explanation. So that's something that I would ask policymakers to bear in mind.
Thank you very much for the detailed answer. And thank you for all the effort. Alder Benford.
Thank you, President Abbas. So, Mr. Rolfs, I really appreciate the 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of analogy. And I certainly want to piggyback on some of your words that once you announce you said it so diplomatically, there will be feedback. So as an alder, probably within property 2 and 3, I guess the question I'm asking is, I understand why you wouldn't want to put anything out there in the public at this point, but when will those communications start where us alders might know of these properties?
We would work with staff and community development in the mayor's office as we get appraisals for these properties and continue to vet them. The one thing that I would note, in addition to my comment about the willing seller, willing buyer portion of this, obviously we need a willing seller, but we also need a willing buyer. if we get appraisals that come back and the value is, for whatever reason, determined to be more than staff support, or that I don't want to speak for the mayor's office. I see there are several deputy mayors here. I try to keep myself out of trouble. But if it's more than the mayor is comfortable with, then that would probably take that particular property off the list.
So I probably didn't ask the question clearly, Mr. Ross, and I'm sorry. The question was, when will you begin communicating with alders about these potential properties?
I don't actually know a date. I would like to be able to tell you that it would be on such and so date at such and so time. But until we have the values back, until we have additional vetting internally on, all of the other pieces that go into this, I don't know that I can give you an answer that will hold up to the test of time.
So maybe, if it's okay, President Abbas, Mr. O'Keefe, we talked a little bit about this in the past. So in the process, I just want to go on record as saying, as an alder, potentially with sites 2 and 3, I would like to know sooner than later. So I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, Alder Benford. Alder Bennett?
Hi, I just wanted to ask, what did I want to ask? You might have already addressed this, but just to clarify, for the 4 locations, where does that put us on our timeline? To have a location, because I know this is an urgent matter. So I was wondering, where does that put us, in terms of a timeline?
When you say timeline, just to make sure I understand your question, Ollie, you mean from the perspective of where does it put us on delivering a shelter that is open for use? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah.
I will look a little bit to Jim to help me out here as well, but from an acquisition perspective, for properties that are part of that process, we would need to probably have at least 6 months once we get to that point, because we would have to come before this body, come before the council with a resolution to actually acquire the property. We would have to do all of the due diligence and then move to closing. And that is roughly a 6-month process. And I would like to note that in that 6 months, I am factoring for, let's just say, additional time for all of what I believe is a fair assumption that would include additional meetings, additional notices, public hearings, public comment, etc. After that, once we actually own whichever site is selected, then there would be a time of designing the building, designing what the shelter will look like, bidding, and then actually budgeting for that construction and then constructing the shelter. So it is not anytime soon. For any of the properties that would have either a substantial redevelopment component or a sort of built new component. I would ask Jim, if I'm misstepping, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think the point to understand is that this would be a public works project, and a public works development process is a very structured one by state law, and so there are these mandated steps that we have to take and required amounts of time that we need to devote to bidding for an architectural design consultant and a construction contractor and so on. So I think 2 to 3 years is a reasonable, we're on that path, 2 to 3 years.
And is that that's incumbent on whether or not we approve one of these 4 locations, correct?
It presumes a near-term selection of a site, yes.
Yeah, so if we're asked to go back to the drawing board to find 4 new sites, it will most assuredly stretch that time period out.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alder Bennett. Alder McKinney?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is my second time speaking. Jim, my question is to you. We talked about location, but I want to hear you say that the idea of a purpose-built permanent shelter, and you have done that research and you know what that looks like infinitely well. And so these properties that you are looking at now, do they fit a purpose-built shelter that will be sustainable and have the components and the capacity that we, some of us, that we expect?
Alder, yes, they absolutely do. In all cases, they provide ample space for more than just an overnight shelter. That's really been one of the factors that we've taken into consideration as we've looked for sites. So, yes, they all afford plenty of room to do the kinds of things that we've talked about wanting to do.
Thank you, Alder McKinney. Any further question? I do not see any hand raised. So thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dan, for the update. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
We will move to the next agenda item. Agenda item number 4, file number 65527, establishing purpose-built full-time and shelter search criteria. Can I have a motion on the floor?
Hold on, looking for the move approval.
Can I have a second? Alder McKinney, thank you for the second. If move and seconded, and before I go on the discussion, we have a one registrant, Brenda Conkle, wishing to speak. Brenda?
All right, I'll just go ahead and pass. I think at this point, it's kind of a moot point after that last discussion, so thanks.
Thank you. And Stefan, I can see Alder Jeanette Cole and Gary Helverson is in attendees. Can you move them as a panelist?
Yeah, I'll promote them. Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will briefly talk as a sponsor of the resolution on the search criteria. So looking at the search criteria, most of that wording has been taken from the search criteria City of Madison is already using. The major component of this search criteria is 3.5 miles from Beacon. And the purpose is very clear to create accessibility, a walking distance for a homeless man or people who are really disconnected and want to be close to downtown. They can walk within 1 hour, or they can bike within 15 to 20 minutes and close to the Beacon and the services. And that's the major difference other than the search criteria, and that is in front of you for a debate. Any questions? Alder Bennett.
Yeah, I want to ask a few questions, and this will probably be more towards Jim. And this might sound a bit, what's the word for it? Repetitive from the last City County Homelessness Issues Committee. But I want to ask this, and have it on record here for the committee members that weren't privy to that meeting. So I was wondering, firstly, if you could, maybe just speak to, does the criteria change what you've been looking to at all in the first place? Also, under the search criteria, one of them is, not being near single family homes, and like how would that impact your search?
Alder Bennett, I think as Alder Abbas said, the criteria set out in the resolution fairly closely mirror those that we have used. The one exception is the addition of the 3.5 mile radius from the beacon. So that's really the most significant difference. But I would just add that these criteria were guidelines, and it was certainly the case that we identified properties that met most, but perhaps not all of the criteria, or that missed on a couple, but by just a little bit. So they weren't intended to be absolute requirements of the search. And it's been my understanding of the proposed resolution that neither are those criteria intended to be absolute requirements of our search. So we use them as guidelines. They worked, I guess, but for the fact that we have yet to identify a permanent site, they worked fairly well for us. I can't think of any sites that staff were enamored with that fell outside of those parameters, either those that we were using or those that that are addressed in the resolution. Of course, the Desire Road would have been problematic from the distance perspective, but otherwise, they haven't really hindered the search.
Sure, for sure. Thanks. And the other question that I had, apologies, my voice is like really going. So the other question I had was, I was wondering, so if we put the search criteria in specifically in terms of the distance, do you think that could affect the search process and like negotiation process with potential properties? And like, I guess what I'm getting at is like, if we say we want a location to be within 3.5 miles of the beacon, say we find that location and we already said we want this really badly, we need a location that's within 3.5 miles of the beacon, would you say like then the price tag just went up for that? Like could specifying the search criteria impact negotiations of that at all? Or am I just kind of grasping at straws?
Dan might have something to say about that. I don't think it would have an appreciable impact. And I would say, speaking for myself, that neither would I be uncomfortable bringing to the council and to the mayor a potential site that fell outside of that 3.5 mile distance if I thought that there were other attributes of the site that made it a compelling choice. One of those, of course, would be access to good public transportation. So I don't think that even if that criterion remains, that it's going to have a very significant impact at this point.
I would, just to add on, if I may, to Mr. O'Keefe's comments, some of this too will be a function of how set on a site we are. And by that, I mean, if the council and the mayor direct staff to go and acquire, let's say, site number 3, simply for the sake of argument, before we as staff terms with the seller, that will make our negotiations more difficult. That being said, staff will do essentially as instructed. And if policymakers choose options 1, 2, and 3, then we will do our best to come up with a deal that will work for hopefully each one of those and present them back to policymakers.
Thank you, Dan. Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I have a question, and I don't know if this is like just me or if this might hit other folks the same way too. And I'm wondering if the sponsor would be willing to provide some feedback on this, as well as Mr. O'Keefe. I'm wondering, since these criteria, it sounds like we really need them to be flexible rather than being, requirements. And by calling them criteria, it kind of sounds to me like they're requirements. Why not call them priorities or guidelines or recommendations instead, so that they, to me, that communicates that they have more flexibility than the term criteria. But maybe it's just me. So,
If Jim, that's okay if I can speak. Thanks. So, Alder Lemmer, the intent of this resolution is not to create a law. It's not, as Jim O'Keefe mentioned, this is just a preference, and it's like a guideline. If I put in your what you are saying, rather than using criteria, while name could be changed and wording might be tweaked here and there, but the intent is really to give the preference, not really. And again, if there is a site on 4.2 miles and it's extremely connected to, if it's have a good connection with public transportation, it's not like the sponsor of the resolution like me, and I'm gonna stuck on, it's 0.7 miles away, I'm not going to vote in favor. I'm just speaking on behalf as a sponsor myself. It's just the preference, what type of preference we as a council, as a policymaker want to set for our homeless community, and how close we want to be how close we want them to be close to services, and especially to Beacon and the downtown area. I hope I answered your question, Jim. Feel free to chime in.
I just note that the resolution doesn't say that any site must meet each and every one of those criteria. Rather, it talks about sites should be should be a certain distance, should meet certain criteria. So again, we've viewed those as guidelines and preferences, not requirements.
okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Alder Lemmer. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I wondered if Jim or Dan perhaps had seen the one written public comment that we received for this agenda item. There are several maps in there that seem logical to me, that seem to eliminate a great deal, most likely of even the properties that you're currently considering, if they're accurate, and they seemed to be to me. Did you happen to get a chance to look at those maps?
I did not, Alder Heck.
One of them is, the half-mile rule about daycare and schools, and that seems, and then the commenter, drew a circle around every daycare and of a significant size and public school, and it seemed to eliminate almost everything. But I mean, I know you've been looking at these criteria, so I just wondered if you had any comment. But I think you probably have to take the time to assess the accuracy of those maps. So they were, that plus the zoning districts and things seem to imply that, this was incredibly limiting. Since you haven't seen them, perhaps those will come up in discussion. But I'd encourage committee members to look at those in Legistar. That's the only public comment in Legistar on this item. Thanks.
Thanks, Alder Heck. Alder Haley.
Thank you, President Abbas. I had similar comment with the Alder Heck, but then since my hands are up still, I'm wondering, I know this resolution is basically this site, but I'm wondering if the city is working simultaneously with the vision of the shelter in terms of what kind of programs or what kind of strategic objective to vision this shelter looks like, but also identifying some of the partners within the community. I know it's a lot of work to find the site, but also being very strategic and being intentional in creating some of those programs so that when we have a site, at least we have some of those programmings ready. So I'm wondering if the city is also looking on the site what kind of vision this center would look like.
Alder, I'm not sure that I'm understanding your question. Are you talking about its proximity to other services? Or are you talking about the site's suitability to accommodate a range of services?
A range of services.
Yeah, so I think one of the criteria that actually the mayor directed us to pay attention to early on was to look for, at the time we were asked to look for properties that could be converted relatively quickly to shelter use, as we were contemplating the need to leave first Warner Park and then the First Street location fairly quickly. And then also to place a premium on properties that afforded us the ability to expand or develop a property that could support, that would have room for programming and services beyond merely overnight shelter use. So that has been front and center in our minds as we've looked for different sites, and that's why I'm pleased to be able to respond to Alder Harrington McKinney's question that I think that all four of the sites that we're currently looking at could very well accommodate a broader range of services than just overnight shelter.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Alder Haley. Vice President Martin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to check and see if it is appropriate, and if so, I would like to ask if Brenda Conkle would come back. I actually really wanted to hear what she had to say, if that's okay with the rest of the body.
Any objection to the request? Stefan, can we get Brenda Conkle for question from Vice President Martin? Brenda is unmuted.
Thank you.
Brenda, you should be unmuted.
Okay. What I was mostly going to say is that I think that the most important criteria here is that it's within a few blocks of the bus service, and that there is either transportation or an ability to get to the beacon. Some of the other criteria, I had the same reaction, and when I saw those maps that the other person had made, it was kind of hitting home the point that I was thinking, is that if you're going to have it half mile from the daycares, not next to residential, and all those criteria, it seemed extremely strict. But as I was listening to the presentation, it seemed as though there are some properties that the city staff have come up with. And, and again, I guess what I was thinking is this resolution is probably a moot point. They've been working already. They found things that are kind of close to these criteria. And this resolution probably could just be placed on file at this point. And I guess my main concern is that we just move forward as quickly as possible, because 2 to 3 years is a long time without a purpose-built men's shelter.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for sharing. That's all I wanted. I wanted to hear what she had to say. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Martin. Alder Rivers.
Thank you, President Abbas. I would like to see this placed on file. I think that this is a solution in search of a problem. Staff is capable of working well with council without us micromanaging their work. With all due respect to a colleague on this body who said to the press that the Zaire Road site was being shoved down our throats, was being shoved at us, forced at us. That's not the case. There were over 15 sites over a long period of time that were examined. And the intensity with which it was opposed was an interesting contrast to the experts in the field of homeless services, who all were in support. So I would caution all of us against micromanaging staff in this regard. It is a rather moot point. We make suggestions, or it should, but this notion that it needs to be a half mile away from a school or a daycare facility, is that as the crow flies? Or is that as to a linear or, streets? Or is it, it's not necessary. Staff has worked diligently and hard, and we resisted the advice of the experts in the field, and we have placed a longer timeline, extended the timeline before we're going to have a purpose-built shelter. And I think we should just kind of cut the crap and let staff do their job. Thank you.
Thanks, Alder. It seems like we move from question to comments. Anybody have any question for Jim O'Keefe before we go in a discussion? Alder Carter and Alder McKinney, do you have questions? Alder Carter, go ahead.
I have a question. Jim and Dan, from what you have said thus far, taking that into consideration, my question to both of you is, can you work with the criteria that has been shared tonight?
Can we work with them? Of course we can work with them. Again, I do not feel obliged to meet each and every one of the criteria laid out in the resolution any more than I think we felt obliged to meet the criteria that we set out on our own.
So it is something that you can work with. I guess that's what I'm asking you.
Sure, Alder Carter, we want to put a site before the council that will attract 20 votes. That's our goal. So if it's the council's wish that we follow the guidelines that are set out in the resolution, we'll do that. If that resolution does not advance, we've got criteria that we've developed on our own that we'll use. We'll do what we need to do to find a suitable site.
I would echo what Jim said. The way this is drafted is something that we would work with. And one other thing just to expand upon, should you as council members modify this or make wholesale changes to it, we will do our jobs and do our very best to come back to you with sites that will meet your criteria. The way this is drafted now, we will continue to move forward to come up with something that, or several options hopefully, that meets your guidance in this resolution. So that being said, none of this is easy.
Thank you. And I do have a comment when we get to that stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Carter. Alder McKinney, I believe you have a comment too, correct?
No, I'm waiting for the discussion.
Okay. Alder Foster, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. Jim, I guess I'm also trying to decipher how much is this a moot point or not. I mean, I hear you and Dan both saying like, you know, it's pretty similar to what you've already been working under, but you're also happy to adjust things if you get different criteria. But we just heard a presentation about being what sounded like well down a path of having identified a group of sites, whittled it down to 4, the appraisal work that needs to happen, the timeline of all of that. So, I mean, I guess my question is, will whether this gets passed or not impact in any way the plan to bring potentially 4 sites forward for consideration, or is it completely moot?
The resolution in my mind does not alter my thinking on the 4 sites that we're currently considering.
And then it sounds like there was a larger group that got whittled down to the 4. Were any sites that might have been viable in your opinion otherwise? Have they been excluded because of the criteria that is drafted in here? So in other words, if it's got rejected, you would not bring in an additional option that you had wanted to bring forward?
No, they would not have eliminated any of the sites that we've taken off the table.
Okay, and then most of the questions have been around the criteria, which are actually listed in a whereas clause, which I mean says that that we already have established those, but the be it resolved clause says that we are requesting that you will provide a list of eligible sites and estimated cost based on these criteria and present it to CCEC by June 15th, and then provide regular monthly updates on the search for a shelter. So again, in the last update, we heard kind of what the ideas and intent would be absent this resolution. Can you just remind us what that plan would be in terms of timing of when you would bring alternatives forward, and I think including what Dan kind of mentioned about the balancing act of not tipping our hands to be able to negotiate a purchase where we might need to, like, how does that be it resolved clause in this resolution gel with what you were planning or wanting to do in terms of presenting alternatives to us?
Alder Foster, I'd like for us to be able to have a complete, the ability to have a complete analysis of the sites that we're considering. So taking into consideration cost implications, not just for the acquisition of properties, but for either renovation or new construction. Just to have that complete comparison that would be informed by appraisals, that would be informed by work that our colleagues in engineering are doing in terms of projecting costs for renovating or for new construction, those kinds of things. Seems to me that would best serve the mayor and the council to put that fully vetted set of options in front of you.
And that would obviously need to be following receipt of the appraisals, and then with, I don't know if any of this engineering analysis happens in parallel or if it has to happen subsequent to or what, but I mean, what is the best estimate then in terms of timeline to be able to present that to the Common Council or CCEC?
I've been wrong so many times that I'm surprised anybody still asks me this, but I think the appraisals are the first, and being able to use those appraisals to find out, as Dan said, whether we have a willing seller or a realistic seller. I think that I mentioned that there were one of the 4 properties involves substantial renovation, and engineering's work is largely complete in analyzing what that would look like and what it might cost. The other alternatives largely involve new construction, and so that's I think that's an analysis that could apply to multiple sites. It wouldn't have to necessarily be crafted individually for each site. So I would think not so long after those appraisals are received and we've had an opportunity to find out if current owners are serious about selling properties. September, I think, is not an unrealistic month when that information might be available to us. And Dan, I don't know if you think that's on the mark or not.
I think probably the meeting in September might work for a discussion about the options that are out there, with the caveats that Jim has provided that between now and then we could see an awful lot of change for a host of reasons.
That's helpful. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Dan, this is probably a question for you. If we were to have such a presentation in September, would you envision us going into closed session whenever we discussed the candidate addresses to protect the potential real estate transaction that might occur?
I would defer to the city attorney on that. My gut, though, says probably not, because it's not negotiations. It's discussion about that particular, about various options and making a choice. But I think I see a city attorney on the call. Yes, I see I see Attorney Haas is here, and he could probably opine like a real lawyer instead of me just pretending to be.
I can just chime in briefly. I think Dan's correct. I mean, we need to evaluate. There's certainly an exception to the open meetings law to discuss deliberations or negotiations if there's a legitimate reason to. So I think we'd have to see where we're at that time and whether there is both the exception applies and as a policy matter, whether the staff would recommend going into closed session and how the mayor and council feels about that.
Thanks. And then, Dan, but if we didn't go into closed session, then, or if it wasn't appropriate to do so, the information about all 4 potential sites, would that, in your mind, have the potential to impact the transaction price potential?
At that point, it could. I don't want to say yes or no because this is real estate and there are a million things that could impact that. That being said, once we are to that point, we would have appraisals in hand. And that comes more to the issue of willing seller, willing buyer. And using my example from before, if our appraisal says it's worth $100 and they were a willing seller at $100, but now that it's out, they want $300, that doesn't change our opinion of value. And as staff, we would recommend against paying inflated price for anything, regardless of whether it's for this particular use or something else.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Any other questions? I do not see any hand raised. We have a motion on the floor. We have a second, and we will go open for discussion. Alder McKinney.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me be clear on what's before us in discussion, because I want to make sure that I'm speaking to the right piece. because there was a suggestion of being placed on file. That is not what's before us. Is that correct?
The motion on the floor is to accept the report, and there is a second.
Okay, all right. I want to speak to that. I would not support placing this on file. I'm appreciative of the hard work that the sponsor put forth, and these are the reasons that I am supporting this. One, I did feel, and I'm just going to own it, what I felt, that the Zire Road site was being forced down my throat. I did feel that way. Secondly, the goal was to build a purpose-built shelter that was functional, expandable, access to services, and sustainable. And there was a comment made about micromanaging staff. And that is not new to some alders, the micromanaging staff. The other thing is that during one of the meetings of the Community Service Commission, one of the members on that body who had been homeless and works diligently with homeless said the close proximity to the Beacon and downtown is critically important, and he said that. The other piece I want to say is where's my note? Oh, the service providers. In private, service providers had said and expressed that they were glad that the Zire Road location was not selected. They were saying that, and I'm not saying all of them, but certain ones came to me and expressed that. And they said the reason they went along with it was because their fear of that was all that was available to them. Brenda said that it's been a 2-year period. It has been longer than that. Mary Kay Baum has been fighting for a purpose-built of permanent shelter for many, many years. And we are come to a point, and not to throw out the work that this resolution has put forward, but the hard work and diligent work in putting some parameters in place in order to help the staff to come up with some viable options that they had not come up with before. And so I am absolutely in support of the resolution that's before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder McKinney. Alder Heck.
Thank you again, President Abbas. I'm going to offer a substitute motion, and I'll explain that motion. Should I get a second? That motion is to place this on file.
The motion is moved. Second. Alder Bennett, second that.
Shall I speak to my motion?
Please.
Thank you. I appreciate what Alder McKinney was just verbalizing and the intent behind this, but I feel like to a certain extent it's a bit like what Alder Evers mentioned. It's a solution in search of a problem, because staff is already using these criteria, and I'm also not entirely certain that the language in here won't be at some point a requirement rather than just a suggestion, that it's not really necessary to have this enacted. I also worry what happens if one of these 4 sites doesn't work out. I think we need to give staff the freedom to use their expertise. I worry about that last clause that I think Alder Foster wisely pointed out, these reports, I worry about discussing these 4 options on a regular basis. If there are 4, maybe there'll be 6 eventually. Who knows? Maybe there'll be 1. But I feel like we need to give staff the freedom to do their work and use their expertise, and that we are in some ways micromanaging, although I appreciate the intent. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Alder Foster.
President Abbas, I agree with the motion to place on file, maybe with some different rationale though. I very much appreciate the intent of the resolution and do think that for such a significant decision, it is wise to have it be part of council deliberations. And I understand the feelings, I think, of some folks of having been presented with what felt like one predetermined location and whether people felt it was a good one or not. I think having some members of the council feel surprised by that and feel like there weren't other alternatives to consider and to have not participated in that process, I think maybe wasn't the best way to go about it. So I do support having closer involvement from the council in what I think is a really significant decision. The reason I would support placing on file is I actually take issue with a number of the criteria, and I understand that many of those were already criteria that staff was working with, but as I think was demonstrated in the email that was sent to all of us around the half mile from a school, I always was very surprised by that and felt like, what are we saying when we list that as a criteria? That we actually think it's going to be hazardous to have a permanent supported men's shelter within a half mile radius of any school. I mean, I think that's an important statement that we're making, and clearly by the map that I think probably is accurate, it basically covers the entire city. So I think that's a bad thing for us to put into the record. This part about not being adjacent to single family homes, I'm going to call that out. And I think we got to be really careful and watchful for that. There's a lot of history and tradition wrapped up in entitlements around single family home residents versus multifamily home residents. And it makes no sense to me that it would be appropriate for a men's shelter to be adjacent to an apartment building, but not next to a single family home. So I think that's another area where we have to be more careful. And I don't think we should be codifying language like that. The third and probably the most significant is the proximity to the beacon. Again, I totally get the intent of not wanting to separate a shelter from day services. But as we heard during the Zaya Road debate, and I think was confirmed tonight, this new permanent location could likely hold the day services instead of. And so it doesn't make sense for me that we would limit a criteria to be next to where we're providing day services right now, if we could likely propose having those day services actually housed in the same facility. So that one also just doesn't make sense for me that we would want to limit ourselves there. And then, finally, at the end of the day, regardless of the criteria, the actual resolution, as is there right now, says that we need the report from staff by June 15th. Obviously, that date has already passed. We heard from Jim that it may be sometime in September would be more realistic. So, for all of the reasons before, I think just placing it on file at this point makes the most sense. But I do, again, support having this work in front of us and actually getting a presentation that I think was the intent of the resolution in the beginning. Thanks.
Thanks, Alder Foster. Alder Carter.
Yes, I just want to say a couple things. The Common Council micromanages a lot of stuff. Twice a month, we micromanage. So to say that we shouldn't micromanage this is almost laughable, because we micromanage twice a month. And I'm not even going to count what we do in committees. and commissions and boards. I am not going to support putting it on file, but what I want to say is that for 40 years, not only the city of Madison, but Dane County did not lead in getting an adequate men's shelter. For 40 years, we looked the other way. And not we, today's Common Council, but the city and alders of the past looked the other way. We were more than content and having it in the variety of church basements. We were more than content to having people live in makeshift tents in the Arboretum in any wooded area. We were more than content. And the one good thing that has come out of COVID-19 is the fact that we are, at least some of us, are on the same page, some of us meaning the city and Dane County, on the same page of trying to get a shelter. That is the one good thing that came out of COVID-19. But in the process of that one good thing, let's make sure we do it right. Let's make sure that we take into consideration not the experts in the field, take in consideration not the advocates, but take in consideration what is best for the homeless individuals. What happens when they can't catch the bus? What happens when they miss the van ride? That's where we need to put ourselves in their shoes. And I just want to make sure that we get this right. Now, I'm not going to tell you who I'm going to quote, but I'm going to tell you, let's park our egos at the door and let's do the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Alder Carter. Alder Bennett.
So, sorry, I'm just taking in what was just said. I support putting this on file. I don't support the resolution. I don't support this having a search criteria. And what I really want to point to is the difference between intent versus impact. Maybe the intent is there that having Common Council put a search criteria that city staff is already using would help. I don't really see how. But I do know that there is a strong potential for negative impact on the homeless community that we're supposed to be centering. And that, say, for example, if the 4 locations that city staff has identified falls through, we find another location that's outside of these criteria. If we pass this resolution, anyone that doesn't want that location will always point to this resolution and say, look, Common Council, you already said you wanted something that falls within this specific criteria. You already said you wanted a location that isn't adjacent to single family homes, that is within 3.5 miles of the beacon. So don't approve this location. And we had a location going. The problem isn't the criteria. The problem is us approving these locations. We had Sire Road, and we could have approved that, and we didn't. And now what was supposed to take a year is now estimated to take 2 to 3 years. If we want to center the homeless population, then we should have approved that location. When we had the service provider saying, yes, let's go through with it, we had city staff who has been working on this issue for over 6 years saying, yes, let's push this through. And we didn't. The problem isn't the criteria. Staff has already been using this criteria. And I want to take this aldermanic privilege to go ahead and share my screen. 1 second, if I can figure this out.
So under the Robert rules, Alder Bennett, sorry if I'm interrupting you, the body have to approve that request to share the screen. So
can I share my screen?
No, you can share it, but I just want to make sure if it's okay with the body. And attorney has just correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so under the Robert rule, the body, if it's okay with the body, you can share the screen, right? Attorney has?
That's correct.
Any objection on sharing the screen? Alder Carter, you're unmuted.
Objection. I just want to make sure that goes into Legistar.
Okay. Attorney Hess, could you please advise if Alder Bennett shared the screen? I know it is recording, so it should be part of the record.
I shared it during Common Council meeting.
Yes, Alder Bennett, it just came to my knowledge this because there are quite a bit of requests about sharing screens. So internally, the council leadership is having that discussion with the city staff. It's okay. We are not asking you to share. I just want to make sure it's not only for you, for future orders too, because there are a lot of requests coming of sharing screens. So I want to make sure that body is okay with that. And it seems like there's no objection. And it is recorded, Alder Carter, so it will be part of the record. So please go ahead, share your screen.
Okay, here, I'm sharing my screen. So I just want to get this on record, just because I wasn't privy to this until Patrick pointed it out, and I'm a very visual person. So I think the public comment really gave a really good visual of like what it means, like the criteria that we're approving. So like this yellow area right here shows if we want it within 3.5 miles of the beacon. Then this is the second is now the criteria. If you want it should be greater than half a mile from the daycare centers. This yellow criteria is right here. It only shows what is available. And then if we add on to that, it needs to be commercial mixed use. This is the blue area. You only see these small patches of yellow right here, 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 and here. That still isn't and here. It still isn't necessarily near the downtown area or what we want. And it significantly limits like what we're trying to look for search criteria. So when we're saying we want the optimal location, if their optimal location falls within like these 4 little bubbles, then that says a lot about like who we're trying to assist here. Why can't I stop sharing screen? Okay, there we go. So I don't think we should limit ourselves. And then staff has already been using the criteria that they have been. If it's not broke, then don't fix it. So, intent versus impact, people.
Thank you, Alder Bennett. I will also speak now as well. I appreciate really thoughtful dialogue, and I think it's very important as a common council to have that deliberation in front of us, resolution to really make policies better. Coming on a resolution itself, I understand some of the points are valid. I understand about daycare, schools, single-family homes. There is a way forward. We can do amendments. We can remove it. We have that option as well, rather than placing on a file. We as a body is a lawmaking body. It's a huge thing for all of us to create a criteria or shelter and move city into the right direction. The intent here is to provide guideline. This is not a law. This is not like, if it's next to the 5 mile from the school, there should not be. I understand some of alders have concerns about this can be used as a resolution. But matter of fact is, in last 3 years, almost 2.5 and 3 years as an alder, I have noticed many times in Common Council, laws or recommendation passed by Plan Commission, passed by many other committees, come to council, and council as a final body totally rejected and went in a total different direction. I don't want to talk about what exact agenda items were those, but I do remember there are many. It happened more than twice, at least. Major agenda items changed, go against the decision of the committees and commissions. So I understand the concern, but at the same time, we Common Council also micromanage. Matter of fact, is this our job? We are elected body. We don't work for City of Madison. We work for constituent. And that is our job, to create policy and process and procedures. If this particular process, if you have, if the council have issues with it, we can amend it. Why would we put on a place on file of something where we want to give direction as a council? If we really think as a body, and no offense to the staff, they're doing a phenomenal job. The last 2 years, more than 2 years, I'm working with staff on various issues. And during the time of pandemic, and it's been more than over a year, I'm meeting every other week with community development on issue of homelessness. And I really acknowledge their great work and their time commitment to this cause. I'm not taking anything away from them. But if staff have to do all the policy making, and they should be the body to decide what should go, we should pack our bag and go home. What's the point to be an alder on the issues? If we think so, staff should decide how the impact of F-35 should happen. Staff should decide how the shelter criteria should be set. If the staff should decide how PFAS should be dealt, or other major issues city is facing. I'm talking about major issues the city of Madison is facing. We should go home. What's the point to be elected official? My try and intent here, along with other order, was immediately after the Zaire Road, this resolution was written, to give a certain guideline what as a community we want to see. Perhaps my fellow colleagues think differently, which is totally fine. It's normal to have different opinion. We should amend it. We should make other changes. At least we should move forward and create a criteria for our homeless community, and clear criteria what as a Common Council our role is, what we want to see. And the staff is committed to work on it, rather than placing on a file or refer it to, whichever date. That's not a good policy. We should be the one deciding as a council, rather than letting the mayor office or staff or other stakeholders to decide which way this very particular decision should go. Absolutely understand all the sentiments. It's very emotional discussion, especially around the shelter. And I think so we all want best in our heart. But again, I do think so as a policymaker, we should be the one setting the tune, which way we want to move city forward. Might be the suggestion which I propose along with other orders might be not acceptable, but there is an opportunity for us to amend. And I'm open for that if you have any suggestion, rather than placing on a file. So I'm not going to vote in favor of placing on a file. Thank you all for giving comments and listening me. Any further comments? I do not see any further comments, and Alder Haley, please go ahead.
Thank you, President Abbas. I really appreciate all that has been discussed and what's before us. I agree with you in regards to that we are policymakers and we have to be able to make policy and guide some of those critical items that are affecting our constituents. I am also in favor of amending this resolution, but not supporting to putting in file. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Healy.
And just one more thing is maybe amending means identifying, like when we see what this center or this shelter is, it's a purposeful shelter, so that at least we can remove some of the criteria, like family homes or 3.5 to Beacon. If there are day programs within the center, then we don't have to be limited to be close to the beacon. So I think we need to revisit what this could look like in terms of what's the vision for this particular shelter that we are thinking to build for our community. Thank you.
Thanks. Any further discussion on a motion to place on a file? Alder Heck.
Thanks, President Abbas. I just wanted to verify who's eligible to vote when we do vote on this motion. It's
all 8 members. Alder Carter is alternative.
Okay, and the chair is able to vote?
Yes.
Thanks.
Alder Bennett.
So point of order, this vote is voting to approve the resolution, correct?
No, the motion on the right on the floor is to place on a file, and there is a second by Alder Bennett by you.
Okay, got it. I didn't know if we were doing first. I was so confused.
Perfect. All right. Any further discussion on the motion? I do not see any hand raised. I do believe this will be a roll call vote. So, Madeline, could you please do a roll call vote?
Yeah, absolutely. Alder Abbas?
No.
Alder Martin?
Yes.
Alder Lemmer?
Yes.
Alder Bennett?
Yes.
Alder Wahalia?
No.
Alder Heck?
Aye.
Alder McKinney?
No.
And Alder Carter?
Alder Carter is
I don't think I'm voting.
I apologize.
That's okay.
Then the vote currently is 4 in favor and 3 opposed to putting the motion on file.
All right, motion approved. So with that, it is placed on file. And we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Perfect. And there's a second. Thank you. It's moved and second. Take care, guys. See you at Common Council meeting.